Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you've had a nourishing lunch break. We're very glad to be back with Sohrab Hura, who is not a stranger to this city. I thought I knew enough about this city, but Sohrab seems to have family secrets to share of great things to watch out for in the corners of Park Street. Sohrab's practice includes drawing, film, photography, sound and text, and forms through these a fluid relationship with the image. Many of us are familiar with his work that shifts between the personal, addressing aspects of familial relationships and illness. At the heart of his practice are photo books such as Life is Elsewhere and Look, It's Getting Sunny Outside. A lot of his work has, in recent years, been presented here at Experimenta. His reflections on everyday ordinariness are also explored through pastel drawings, which is an incredible recent practice in addition to everything else he does. This is a series called Things Felt But Not Quite Expressed. And on the other hand, there is experimental film, such as The Lost Head and the Bird, a film that has been shown at several film festivals and won awards. He also has made the film Bittersweet in 2019 that was awarded the principal prize of the international jury at the Short Film Festival Oberhausen. Sohrab's self-published books, of which there are 5 under the imprint Ugly Dog, such as The Coast, have won the Aperture Paris Book Photo Award, and the book Look, It's Getting Sunny Outside was shortlisted for the same award in 2018. Today he will be speaking to us about not only his own work, but really the immersion that he has had in networks of photo making, collective exercises in image building, the kinds of alliances that have been growing in years of exchanges with image makers in South Asia and Southeast Asia. We're very grateful, I'm just saying also on a personal note, for practitioners such as Sohrab, who are constantly also bringing the voices of younger image makers, creating journeys with them while also receding often from the sphere of authorship for a far more inclusive way of exhibition making. Thank you, Sohrab.
Thank you. Thank you. That was really generous an introduction. I met Sabi Ahmed, who works at the Ashara Art Foundation now, in 2016 during the Shanghai Biennial that Rux Media Collective was curating, and he'd been in touch with how my own relationship with photography, because I started with as a photographer, and how that had been changing, where I was quite frustrated with the medium, and I was at sometimes, I mean, he'd seen me arrive at the idea of working as an image maker rather than a photographer, because images could be beyond photography for me. Images could be film, sound, sculpture, whatever. The possibilities were infinite if I could look at it that way. And in our conversations, I'd also been talking about, in an exhibition space, how limiting sometimes photography can be, because there's this inherent sort of impulse to install, say, photographs in a way that make one really move along the walls rather than move. Like, I was interested in movement in terms of within a space, how one maybe not only moves along a wall, but also maybe back and forth off a wall or sideways. And there was a series of events that had taken place. Sorry, I have a very long-winded way of talking. There was a series of events that was taking place, which was starting with, say, end of 2019, the anti-CAA protests. By January 2020, there was a presentation in Photography for a magazine, an American magazine, I was asked to present my work, but then when I suggested I would present some other people's work, I was asked if they could be Indian. So there was a very jarring dissonance between what was happening on the outside and what was happening, say, in that room, in terms of on the outside thinking about this idea of who is apparently supposed to be Indian, not Indian, and inside there was a kind of a claiming of Indian for the sake of the system of the arts or photography, where you have to kind of take on the role of being an Indian photographer to kind of represent something, and which is something that I wasn't so interested in. So I'd also been already describing my own process as a tree, because there was a lot of confusion around my work, because there was this there's this tendency in the idea of authorship lying in language, and language very often is reduced to being a style, and one recognizes over a period of time authorship in style in photography. It's actually quite silly, but that's how I started. So Sabine been in conversation with me, and he asked me to do something in this place called Isharat Foundation that focuses on South Asia, but I feel primarily the focus ends up being very Indian, and that too like from certain cities. And he'd asked me to kind of look at the history of image making, of photography in the region. And he gave me these 3 questions after these certain conversations and dialogues with over the years. And this was my response to those questions, which was which I at that time called the incomplete map of interconnectedness. I think what I kind of hoped in whatever this exhibition, or at least the first iteration, was going to be the denser locations over here, but it's an incomplete map, because if you can imagine it being outside, if you can imagine it extending outside of this, what seem to be the sparser areas become much denser, and maybe this becomes more sparse. So it's an incomplete map, because I also feel that it's just a small extraction of what this larger sort of network that I imagined. I'd been going through this, I'd written an essay where I talked about always having, as a young photographer, being presented a tree, but the tree was really solid and never really, it was the shiny tree, which was what was maybe the canon of photography, Indian photography, which is always male, English-speaking, upper caste, all of those layers, cishet. And somehow, if I had to kind of talk about my own sort of history of photography or image making, how would I do it? So I could only think in terms of these clusters, my sort of ecosystem. And we can just go forward, because I'm just going to quickly take you through the exhibition, and then I'll go back to some points later. The first iteration that took place in Dubai at the beginning of 2021, it was on conditions that a lot of artists who would be there would not have had any show before. The works would still, there would be a space for people whose works hadn't found a definite form yet, who could still, because I think I didn't really need the exhibition. It was a continuation of something I'd already been part of, which was this conversation with different photographers. Like even over here, I just saw Swapan Nayak, who is much older than me, and I remember as a young photographer, people of that generation gave me access to talk to them, to kind of take knowledge, to kind of just feel part of something bigger. And at the same time, at the back over there, the people for Pachala who I worked with, and there's Zainab as well, who is hiding, but who's also part of one of the iterations, and Pratik as well, who is part of all the 3 iterations. And so the way I kind of looked at this ongoing history of, say, the medium was both, both something that has gone past me and also something that is still sort of to come towards me. And this this exhibition was, it didn't have name tags and descriptions inside it because I think someone talked about spillages, so I think the idea of spillages was quite important in terms of how one takes these bundles from the exhibition. What you see in this exhibition, because we also were talking about exhibition making, also like I guess it was during the time of COVID, so we had the time to also think, and I have to admit also indulge a bit in terms of what one could think in terms of the theory of exhibition making as a practitioner. What you see, for example, these little sort of photographs taped to the wall are what I wanted to call as notations, which were this extra register, which is as important as the artwork. I think for me, what one usually sees as, say, the books that are lying here, which you're free to kind of look at because there'll be some references to it. I think these works for me were always just a residue and of something much more, I don't know if there are any artists here who feel the same, that when you're finally showing the work, nobody really wants to look at the real important stuff, so it was a way to kind of bring in that real important stuff along with what one really also gets to see. So there was a register of what we call the notational part, and there was also the citational part, which was where, for example, in the first iteration, we were citing, say, someone like Dayanata Singh, who, as a young photographer, I would have these, from time to time, 100 rolls of film in boxes left for me with a note saying, just keep doing your work. And it was by this so-called anonymous benefactor. And I would keep leaving these little books that I could give in exchange for whoever it was. It was left at a lab. Over the years, I got to know it was Dayanata. And she hadn't only been doing this with me, but she'd been doing this with a lot of people. And in the end, it was also trying to acknowledge within the show someone who has helped not only me, but actually at least 4 or 5 other people in the exhibition in different ways, supporting people. I was just trying to look at these fragile sort of, this fragile ecosystem, which I think as someone making work sometimes is quite dependent on. Yeah, we can just go ahead. Sorry, I'm taking you through it quite fast because I was told I talk really slow and a lot, so I'm just trying to compress it. I mean, there were artists over here who, like say Jai Singh Nageswaram, who's at the moment in Vadipatti with his family, but he had been in Bombay quite a bit. He's been a friend, someone I've worked with, and one of the many people who I've been quite dependent on for my own work. So even say for the Coast and some of the other works, Jai would be driving me on a motorbike and taking me to different places, translating for me sometimes. And but in the book, in the work, there's very little acknowledgement or very little space for, apart from just a name or something. And but Jai is also an artist in his own right. Jai had been working around the Narmada Bachao Andolan since 2003. He'd been doing other works where he was looking outwards. Only during COVID did he decide to kind of go back, go and look inward, because he was stuck at home. And that's the time he decided to kind of, in a way, make a tribute to his grandmother, Punutai, who started a school for Dalit kids in Vadipati quite a few decades ago. And this slide was actually quite important because it's very convenient to realize in the context of the show, because once the show has been put together, how do I then talk about it? How do I contextualize it? And there was this, I guess, there was a tendency I felt, because I think he was talking so much about caste, to kind of go along with it and to kind of talk about him being a Dalit photographer. And it was this slide that was always reminding me that it was actually about his grandmother. And first, what was really interesting in a place, in doing a show like this in a place like Dubai was a question that I asked someone at that point was, who was living there, was, "Are you from Dubai?" And the response I got was, "I'm from Dubai, but not from Dubai," which actually was way more specific than any kind of binary answer in terms of how one is expected to give, how one is expected to perform being an artist as well, in terms of what is your work about, and is it about migration, is it about like a big topic, to go back to Rux, I think what was really essential to the core of it was, of this exhibition, this whole series of exhibitions, was to try and make something that can allow someone to go back each time and take away different things, I mean, I may have re-quoted them quite a few times already. They might be also tired of hearing it now, but it really stuck with us when they talked about dipping your fingers, dipping your hands into the sea and pulling out seaweed. You never really pull out one seaweed, but a whole bunch of it. And each time you dip your hands in, you pull out a different bunch. So the exhibition, the core of it, in terms of the way it's distributed, was, of course, in terms of echolocation, in terms of how one is able to be aware of their own location in terms of, I mean spatially to begin with, in terms of what are the works they're seeing in conversations from which part of the space, because it changes. And also, like, there are these connections, not only in terms of say the works themselves, the subject matter, but also in terms of you can go. Yeah. Also in terms of say certain relationships that have occurred. To see how, say, two artists, say Vasif, Ritu, being partners, how they might have worked together, how their works can be in conversation with each other. To see, like, both Pratik and Katrin having made a book together in the past, now to have their own works by themselves, but yet close to each other. So we can go ahead. For us, for example, this is an image. The previous slide was Town Boy, a body of work called Town Boy by Satish Kumar. This is a small extraction from a body of work of his called Home, where he'd been photographing the last days of his father, who was diagnosed with cancer. Town Boy actually was him having grown up in Kanchipuram and now living in a big city like Chennai, and him talking about his perspective coming from a smaller town, and how he's looking at the world. And each work is built upon the other. And if you can go to the next one, the Feminist Memory Project, an early iteration. We were looking at the archive not as a repository, but more as a valve, as a passing through, as something that is constantly in motion. And also having these notations crisscrossing across the space, like Satish's notation, kind of in dialogue with the Feminist Memory Project in terms of the archive, in terms of the past, in terms of these other stories. So the idea was to, the world feels so definite, and so like there's an expectation of trying to define yourself in a pretty solid way, but actually the world is a lot more liquid, and the idea was to try and unpack rather than to pack in meanings, but to create something that could allow for many bundles to be unpacked out. And so sometimes when people ask, is it a thematic show? The only answer I can give is that it's a non-thematic show with many themes, in terms of how you, to give you that access to kind of bring out all of these different stories and themes. Someone like Bunu, for example, who actually was the curator of, one of the two curators of the third iteration, sent a letter, which was in Goa in Sunaparanta, where Bunu and Sadia, who is the other artist curator for the third iteration, who was not part of the first two iterations, but she was always part of the map as part of Kali Collective in Bangladesh. They both are the curators for the third iteration, and they both, and Priya and some of the other people, were part of a residency at Dainata's place. So there was, the exhibition, I hope, was to become something like a Rubik's Cube, where the different configurations keep changing. There's never really one meaning to it. I think we were very consciously trying to complicate things more rather than to try and simplify it into something else. Yeah, here you see Pratik's portal, 2020. It was, for me, I think, I'm not a curator, and I'm quite glad for it, because I think that I had a lot more empathy for the curator after this exhibition, because I realized that as an artist, I had a different, I think there was a certain generosity that I wondered if I was a curator I might have had access to, in terms of Pratik's first iteration of Origins was in a room in Chobimela, and in this conversation we asked if it could be more like a doorway, a portal into something else. And even someone like, say, Ritu, whose work Lost Tune, which is I think 61 harmoniums or 62 harmoniums playing out of sync, and it's looking at the cacophony of it is looking at, say, society, how it's reaching a kind of a breaking point back home. It's always got open sound, and for this exhibition, because Farah's work, which is also a sound work, we asked if it could be on headphones, and there were these few artists like, say, Ritu, whose works were a lot more resolved, but we wondered if it could be a notational part, it could be an excerpt if the sound is closed, to kind of look at it that way. And it might sound, I don't know, maybe it's, I don't know how it sounds to the outside person, but for me, it felt like a big deal to kind of ask someone whose work is resolved in a certain sort of form already there, and if they can look at it as an excerpt. You have a lot of books which are published, which people are reading, but it's, I guess, different to read a book which already has footnotes, markings, and not just by a different reader, but by some of the protagonists in the book itself, how that changes the reading of the book. And maybe what I was doing was more like having a kind of a narrative voice, because I was in this very in-between space of really not wanting to be a curator. When I actually put up the work, first, the main works, I was very scared to disturb it, because it was too grand, the space, the white cube. It felt like I shouldn't be disturbing it, I shouldn't be interfering. And Sabi at that time reminded me of my having talked about being a bookmaker, and how like one of his early references to asking me, and in those 3 questions was the exhibition 2017 Sweet Life that was in this very space where I'd taken this book, wherever it is, Life is Elsewhere, and I had turned the space into what I imagined to be like a final book maquette with all the footnotes, with all the, with the different margin. So there were margins over there, there were these scratches, there were these scribbles, which might kind of give you a way of thinking what was happening around the book itself. So that's the kind of a book that I hope that this exhibition could be like, the one which also had certain markings made by the protagonist of the exhibition. We can carry on. This is just to kind of show, I think, yeah, we can go ahead. So this is just to show like how the different viewpoints in terms of how one is looking at works. Someone like, say, Yu, 1 month into the exhibition, Yu's book, Sorry, Not Sorry, where she was looking at her own sort of relationship with this white person in Burma, which is kind of falling apart, and at the same time, she's looking at the country around her kind of falling apart. And 1 month into the exhibition, we started to see the footage of that person doing aerobics in the foreground, and in the background you have those army vehicles going in for a coup in Myanmar. So we can carry on. So there were these other archives, and carry on. So this was just the citation, the empty sort of book, not the book itself, but just the box with these words. The citation was up there. Of course, like there were artists like Nida and Jay who were working with text for for the show, because someone like Nida, who's Ahmadi in Pakistan, going through persecution in the community. I think I've worked with Nida before. She was in the workshop in Angkor with me, and her whole life. Can you go back? Go back? No, as in like, yeah. So, I mean, for someone like, sorry, to Nida, one more? Yeah. For someone like Nida, we, as artists, we are so dependent on the system, say, to apply for grants. Very often these grants are not situated in this location, in a location that's familiar to you, your context that much, but on the outside, like whether it's in the US or in Europe. And to be able to get the grant, you have to keep talking about how you're Ahmadi and you're going through persecution, and becomes a sort of a broken record of sorts. And for this exhibition, we had talked about what if Nida could actually talk about the smaller stories, because I think as people making work, like say as a photographer, there was this tendency or an expectation in me to always look for something really big and then to try and enter it. But what happens if you try and build small and build into something much bigger from a place that's smaller? So what happens if you write something in addressal? What happens if you write something to someone who might already be Ahmadi, or who might already be someone who is totally aware of the context? What would you say then? Would you still describe who an Ahmadi is? And that's when Nida started to talk about certain, I think, anecdotes. Talked about discrimination on the smallest of levels, which I guess someone who's more familiar might know right away, but we were hoping that it would also make someone lean in more to the stories rather than to kind of stay back and receive, the big grand sort of explanation. And we can go next. Addressal was really important. We didn't really have a descriptive text inside the exhibition. There was a lot of material outside of it, but inside we wanted people to be able to to experience the exhibition in a more fluid way. So the addressal is basically from the book Life is Elsewhere. The first text in there is a letter to someone I was in love with, and I'm talking about breaking down at a certain point of time. And I think this breaking down was the addressal to the viewer, both in terms of breaking down, because that's what a lot of people at that time were talking about, I guess, maybe the context of time at that time, at that moment. And it was also in second person, so the text is also referring to you. So in a way, we also wanted the viewer to become the you, and in some ways to take, and there was nothing mentioned in terms of who's written it, or it was just there. And visually it became a different sort of layer to the show, and we can go forward. Go forward. One more. So that wasn't the only addressal. There were also other addressals within the show, like Nida had asked me to write a note to say an uncle who was Ahmadi, who had left Pakistan, gone to Dubai. His family came to see the show. So kind of these little notes for them. Can you go ahead? There were also these other notations which were not text, but image notations, like Satish's brother had migrated to Abu Dhabi to earn for the family, to kind of send money back. He was also supporting Satish's practice as a photographer in a way, so to kind of take back, a message for his brother, for Satish, because also Satish couldn't come himself because of COVID restrictions. And let's just go ahead quickly, yeah. I mean, children's Anjali House images that a lot of other people in the exhibition had worked with them at Anko Photo Festival, and also referring back to my own practice having changed as an image maker after having worked with kids because of the way they moved. Can we go ahead? I'll just skip it more. This is just some photos which we showed by the kids to kind of break. Sometimes as a photographer there's a stiffness, and to kind of break that part of it and allow you to move. Can you go ahead? Okay, so, now go back to the trees. So I'm going to end quickly. This was a forest that I was taken to in the Theosophical Society in Chennai. It was a banyan forest, and it was a massive forest, and Priya and Karthik, who are also artists, and Priya was in the third iteration, were laughing at me because I was quite amazed by this forest. And then they told me there was one tree, and the main tree trunk had kind of died out, and the aerial roots had become their own forest. So actually, the exhibition for me is really about the forest. It's about the movement towards it. And my tree, whatever I hope my tree was just one small tree. Just quickly, because the last bit I want to show you, which is going back to the map, because we had asked some of the artists to also, can you go back a bit, just slowly, to kind of respond to the map with their own maps. So you have some people like say Aishwarya looking from the inside out. Next, you have say Bunu, whose map is a little more organized. Can you go forward? You have Farah's map. Actually, I was trying to, it's a VR map. So, and it kind of goes, I'm not surprised at Farah's because Farah's always hiding a lot of layers. And you have to kind of use that app to see things pop out. Just quickly, it's about to end. Jai Singh's inverted pyramid, where he was also, he had been looking at caste and hierarchy, but somehow he's also looking at the timeline of events that had happened. Katrin's map, who's in Melbourne, which was more sort of at one go. Nida's map was like a chemical formula to me. The reason I'm trying to show you this is, for me, they're like seeds, and it makes me imagine what their sort of exhibition could be like. Satish is also time with like a caterpillar or some sort and something folded. So the Sean's, I'm just going to end here, but basically just to also bring in these other sort of maps with these other perspectives to kind of, again, I think my exhibition was a very, very small part of it. And the feeling of, theoretically, I feel like the only way for it to really live is for me to kind of be out of it, So that's the last note I wanted to kind of end with. Sorry.
Thank you, Sohrab. I think some of my questions and reflections are also just going to be ways for us to continue the conversation and maybe go deeper into certain aspects of what you've shared. So to commence with, I've always been struck by how location within your solo practice and this these collaborative ways of curating are not geographic but geopoetic, and how location is also the night, the letter, the coastline, the non-linear tempo of ritual, and how these exhibitions become journeys where passengers can join at different stations in no particular order. And as you say, it does feel like there is an inscribed generosity in performing the act of exhibition making in this modality, but I also read it very much as part of your long-term practice, and therefore it perhaps also has this free floating way in which it sort of brings itself into institutional spaces without feeling like a performance somehow. And so I wonder if maybe we could create a little bit of a bridge in terms of your methodology over the years and how it enabled you to be an organizer of exhibitions in this.
I mean, when I think about the map, I think when I look at, say, some of the names in there, I guess photography being the medium that it is, I started at a time when internet had just started, and it was a lot slower. And I learned myself over these forums, internet forums. Maybe because photography was able to be circulated far more easily at that time than other mediums online, there were these immediate sort of bonds, connections. I mean, I knew Vasif for many years, but the first time I met him, after having known him and after having had our conversations, I met him at a workshop in Cambodia, not in, India, Bangladesh, but in a place like Cambodia. And I think it was just the nature of the medium that kind of allowed for a feeling of a collective feeling. So I don't think I've ever been part of a collective, but I think that I recognize the feeling of collectivity. And at the same time, these things are, I don't know how to describe it. I guess I see it happening all the time, even over here. I feel like, say, the Pachala group that has come here, there is a collectivity in there, and some of the people are meeting for the first time, and there's a kind of sharing that is happening, and at some other moment of time, they'll go meet someone else. And I think that that's the way I've always seen the system, the real system, not, not the institution system, but I think as more as people making work, there has been this conversation, and of course, like in my own capacity, I do want to drift away from it quite often, and I do want solitude away from it, but I also think that it'll be the end of me to totally be out of touch with people coming in now with whatever thoughts that they're coming in now with. So I hate it, but I love it at the same time. And I don't know if I answer your question, but it's happening all over. So that's and like when I refer to, say, Dayanita, she refers to Robert Frank. So it's a kind of who helped her at a time when she needed help. So, and then there are lots of other people, including Swapan. I don't know if he's left already, but just in terms of making someone not feel that alone, that's what I think someone of that generation gave me at a time when you're really seeking being part of something. I mean, as as basic as another photographer, you know, like as someone who knows how frustrating it is, or who you can vent to, and who can, whatever, give suggestions to you.
Yeah, so since also Dayanita Singh has been someone who has been part of the Experimenter Curators Hub, and it feels already in the course of today as though we are creating that, precisely that kind of constellation as well here, of people who have inhabited this forum together and apart, and there are resonances carrying forward years later in precisely what it means in an embodied sense for the knowledge to have passed from one stakeholder to another. And one of the things that has been key to her practice, in a different register, of course, is the role of citation in terms of how she approaches it, as I understand, very much spatially, as a sort of spatial grammar that becomes set within the circumstances of encountering an image. So there's a kind of inseparability in the architecture of image making, image building that she constitutes. And it seems to create a kind of agency for her as a maker in a bigger sense than a photographer, because we know it's a term she's sort of constantly wrestling with and expanding. So yeah, I would be curious to sort of think through a little bit deeper how the role of citation operates for you, how we've seen it in the exhibition, but if we could talk about it more, and also how you sort of perceive her approach that is not purely about citation, but as I said, also has this spatiality about it in a quite an clear and obstinate sense, also countering the mechanisms of a certain kind of market-oriented way in which an image can be sold or bought. She contests that through bookmaking as well. She also contests the stability of an exhibition as something that is constantly performing and shifting while it is still running. And yeah, I'd be interested to maybe think through some of those modalities, but just in the ways that you've worked with them as well.
I mean, I don't know if I can answer you directly. I guess for me, I look at exhibitions or my own work as iterative, and I think the one struggle is, when does the work come to an end? What form does it take? What is the circulation of it? Is a book different from the exhibition? Is now I'm extracting sound from some work? Is it part of the same? I sometimes work, obviously, in a practical sort of, when I have to kind of put it out, it's to kind of protect the integrity of the work, I have to be a little specific about the connections or the independence between each. But for me, I think everything is cumulative. I think if I'm, say for example, if I'm working with someone on a body of work, I do also look at myself as an editor. I'm not just a maker. And I think if I'm editing a film, then I'm interested in it for the editing part, you know, and not for any other reason, but just to be able to edit. And I think maybe, I don't know if it even touches the element of citation, but I feel that the different roles that one plays, and I'm also learning to kind of acknowledge, to kind of get rid of that baggage of a photographer. And I do feel, I keep telling them that I do have my own imposter syndrome thing going on with the pastels and now the other things. And but in the end, it's really, I think what's made it easier is to look at it as an image. The moment I look at it as working with images, then it doesn't matter whether I'm editing, because I'm still working with the, you know, a different form of it, and citation doesn't really matter so much in that sense, unless my role is very specific. And I do think that I don't know, I've had enough people helping me, so it just doesn't feel something. Like, even if I'm to look in this room, and I know Zainab will hate me again, but say for example her Pixel story, Zainab, Ufaq, Nawal, they're also doing these Hamshira walks in Srinagar for other photographers in a very militarized part of the world, where photography becomes an excuse to also, in a way, take the space back. So that's just one small example of how I think it's not an extraordinary event to kind of have these pillages. I think that a lot of people within the show are already doing many things. I mean, Pratik is he's curating Columbuscope, but he's also teaching in Pachala and doing other things. Vasif has been doing that same thing for a while. Katrin teaches at Angkor. There are people like Uma and all who were students in this workshop are going back as playing the role of a mentor in that phase. So there are these cycles that are already ongoing, and or someone like, say, Jay and Bunu are now actually, they'll be curating something at the Khoj CISA Fellowship program. They're all artists, but they're also sort of opening up their own practices, where I think they go beyond their own works. They're looking at other people's works with their own sort of urgencies, getting those in. So, I mean, again, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but it's just that I feel like for me, I'm happy to have a citation to someone, more because I feel like it's another layer to my work, but at the same time, it's a very, it's part of everyone's practice. I think it's something that everyone's building on.
Before opening up, I'd love to hear more about the role of sound within photography, within this particular project for you. And I've been reading the work of the Black feminist scholar Tina Kampt, whose book Listening to Images is a substantial contribution to the sonic hapticity, as she calls it, of images, and through it really looking at images as contact points, as a field of vibration, apprehended by the human, but also beyond the human capacity to listen. In that sense, thinking in terms of multi-species listening as well, and of thereby registering the capacity of the photograph, not only inside the exhibition space, but its unbounded life outside of it as well. And I wonder if you want to talk about that in relation to this project as well.
I mean, having come to little bit of sound from starting from a photographic place, I think for me sound, I looked at it as being oral pathways for me to negotiate images. If I think in terms of, say, I think I'm quite attracted to the invisibility of it, in terms of how sensorially very often we are kind of, what's the first sort of point of contact and what's happening under the surface invisibly that is affecting the way we are looking at, say, an image, or even in the exhibition when, say, in Growing Like a Tree, the first one where Farah's work was the open sound in that part of the room. It was this crackling, sort of unstable, static-like sound, which was more like a murmur. And it really, I think, changed the space in terms of, it in some ways lent its murmur to many of the other images. And whereas in the following iteration, Farah's work, it was switched off and became a kind of a notation as a residue, and the harmoniums in Ritu's work were kind of amplified to kind of fill up the space, which kind of, it was like a scream. It made the same work. There were a few works. Say, for example, Bunu's work was the one constant, which is the series of portraits called Confrontations, where she's made these self-portraits because that's her sort of screaming back at say, the institution of marriage. And it's a very different sort of work when, or it's a very different relationship to the same work when Ritu's work is complete, you know. And the thing is that from diagonally opposite from Farah's work, the murmur kind of, there was a transference of the murmur into little tick-ticks, you know, of the dot matrix printer in the Packet Collective work, which kind of came in place of the Feminist Memory Project as the new sort of valve of the archive. So one could see a shift in the heartbeat in some ways of the exhibition. And at the same time, you had Pratik's sound, which was spilling, which is more like a calling into a different space. So I think sonically, these were just pathways. It kind of, there were some moments where we allowed for, say, sound from outside to spill in. So, you know, you kind of, the silence inside was more heightened as opposed to the outside. So that's been how I've been negotiating sound. I am very new to it, so I can't also speak more on it. I think I'm still, I am also listening to pictures because in my own work, A Proposition for Departure, the whole idea was to kind of use sound to create an emotional map, where sound also helped me to kind of look at the past, like a, but it was basically just a pathway and not necessarily the past itself.
Thank you. Yeah, I was also thinking about the soundscape of the coast.
The coast, yeah, yeah, how that changes.
Has been, I mean, even when you were new to it, I know for a fact, because I was sharing the work with other artistic practitioners and artists like Aziz Hazara, for instance, when we were working closely for his project, which was shown at Columbuscope, we watched the coast in his studio one night, and it was this insistent, hypnotic, eerie soundtrack that spoke to him at a moment when he was tentatively moving towards a new process. And yeah, so, you know, you may be new to it, but I think you've already made strides in terms of what it means to work with experimental cinema, image making, and sound. But maybe we open up to everybody to see if there are questions or thoughts. Okay, should we start with that? Okay.
Hi, am I audible here? Hi, this is Ron. Most of your firstly, beautiful works. Most of your images are real life situations, like unfettered and photorealistic in more than one way. How do you find? I'm not audible? You are. Okay, fine. So, okay, fine. Okay, actually, I won't be able to stand. Yeah, okay, fine. So, okay, so I would like to ask you, how do you find documentative fine art photography different from photojournalism? Where do you draw the line in between as a medium of expression?
I mean, I think photojournalism operates within a very specific system of rules of circulation, of, I think, news media. I mean, it's something I'm quite removed from, simply because I feel that I don't want to like compare the two, but I would say that I went through my own frustrations of, I looked at it more as a range of how one reveals and how much one hides. And I think that in the photojournalistic system, you reveal a lot more in terms of context, you reveal a lot more in terms of information and so on. And because there's an element of trust, I think it's a very complicated question, a very difficult question for me to answer, because at this moment there's a big crisis in photojournalism with, say, AI that's kind of come in and disrupted, and recently you had the World Press Photo that kind of opened a category for AI, and there was a big backlash against it. I think there's an erosion of trust with images that's made me step back from images. I think looking at both at sound and, say, the pastel drawings and now the gouache work is been mainly because it's not just from photojournalism or documentary. I feel like where I am right now, and sorry to all the photographers here, because that's just where I am at in my life, is that I started to, the two contradictory things started to happen, which is that I'm feeling very numb towards the photographic image, maybe because of the explosion and the circulation of it. But at the same time, we're at a point of time where the role of the photojournalist is more important than ever. So it's a contradictory thing for me. But in general, I would say that the role of the photojournalist is way more important. I mean, whatever's happening in Gaza, so you're so reliant on images coming from there. Otherwise, everything is hidden. And Photoshop is now selling AI-generated images of Gaza, Israel, whatever is happening. And in some ways, all of these things, I mean, it's an entire curator's hub for me, this conversation, because already technology, I think, was heading towards the idea of perfection in an image in a certain way. Both the photographers and the technology was moving that way, and AI has immediately caught up with it. There's something very clean, very smooth. I'm more attracted to glitches. I think I'm trusting these glitched images a lot more, something which is not quite perfect, but that in itself might become co-opted by the system at the moment. So I can't really, at the moment for me, that's just not where my brain is at the moment in terms of thinking about where to draw a line between documentary and this thing. I'm talking about images in general. On the one hand, I have this existential crisis where do I want to make more images? I haven't made photographs in the last few years. And
why is that?
Because of all of this. Even before AI, I felt that it had a lot to do with the circulation of images. It had a lot to do with context. It had a lot to do with the speed at which images are being circulated. And it helps to come to a slower space and look at it, but I just feel numb towards the images. Sorry to photographers here, but I also feel guilty while expressing this because I don't want to cast my opinion as how it is. It's just me, and I'm feeling more drawn to broken images. I'm feeling more drawn to. I used to hate paintings, and sorry to painters here, but I used to hate paintings. But now somehow there's something quite beautiful, and it makes me give it time. But at the same time, from outside, I think my fellow photojournalists are extremely important people for me who work within a system that I trust. So there are many sort of add-ons in that sense.
Thank you.
The reason I'll ask the online question, some people who are following online are also asking. I think it's in line with what you've just said, so you can decide to either not respond further or asking the question. Shubham Bishash, very thought-provoking to hear yourself as an image maker and not just a photographer. You mentioned your frustrations, limitations of photography. That made me think of how, if at all, you would consider historic photographic processes from late 19th century to be an avenue for more budding practitioners to take up. The maturity of these early processes, forcing the photographer to slow down, pause, reflect, definitely presents to me an opportunity to break away from the image frenzy smartphone we live in. What are your thoughts on this? Thanks so much.
I mean, yes is an easy answer, but I would say no. Because I think the one amazing thing about photography is that I'm also having these thoughts because now I feel like, why wasn't I drawing, painting all my life? Because I can just sit at home and do it and I don't have to meet anyone. And it's a luxury that I really appreciate now, but at the same time, what I'm really wary of is to just be lost in my own space and to lose touch with the world. And somehow photography, I think, is really valuable in the documentary photography is very valuable in being in touch with the world. I'm in a bit of a, a lot of my work has, at least initial work, came from, say, if you look at, say, Life is Elsewhere, look, it's getting sunny outside, coming from that lived experience, talking about mental health. But at the same time, I also am very scared of a world where everything is lived experience, because then I see many more islands, and I think that there is definitely a role of the outsider, provided I know it's the outsider. I think what I'm scared of and what I'm wary of in general is claims of being definite, because that's the other layer that I think the world is functioning with. So I do think that if every work that I see is lived experience, then I somehow I think that there needs to be a balance of both. So definitely I think historical work has its own place and is doing its own role, but if someone does want to go out into the world and make more images, no matter how saturated it is, you never quite know what. My 2005, I was on the Rozgar Adhikar Yatra, and right after university, and I was photographing when Narega was being passed through, when it was being implemented, and I kind of couldn't do the work beyond a point of time because I was having my own dilemmas about what's the point of me doing it when nobody wants to publish it? Am I doing it just... So I had those dilemmas, but today when I look back, actually there's not much document of the movement that was happening at that time, and I'm really glad today for having done that, and there's a little bit of regret that I didn't do more. So in some ways, I also feel like there are still lots of stories to be recorded, and people are recording their own stories, but I also feel like there's no one community member who's also able to represent the entire community. It's way more complex than that. So I would like to see a world with all perspectives. So which is why I think you should work with historical work. I do envy historians because there is this ever-growing bank of images to be looking back at, and what I'm dealing with is, I think, the present, and that's what kind of, there's too much of it coming at the same time, and it's difficult to process it all.
Let's take more questions. Let's see if there are more questions. Anyway, yeah.
Sohrab, so I sent a letter at Sunaparanta last year, and I'm just curious more from a curatorial aspect. How did the dynamics change when you were doing this at Ishara in Dubai, and then you come down to Sunaparanta in Goa? And what were the sort of negotiations or conversations you were having with your fellow curators? I presume, as you said, they came in for this iteration. So I'm just curious about, what are the negotiations, conversations? How did the dynamics change?
No, I mean, Bunu and Sadia people have known for a long time. I think it was a frustrating experience for them to work with me because there is a push and pull, but at the same time, I think it's amazing what they did, and it's, I think it's not really the dynamics between them. I think the one thing that we were wary of was, for example, when the first place it got published, Bunu and Sadia's names were missing. It was only Dainita, and there was a mention of me, but it was mainly about Dainita. And I feel that was one thing that I was quite scared of, which was I didn't want them to be sort of backgrounded in that sense. And so then we had to make a conscious effort with Suna Paranta to kind of only give their names and not all of us, because if all of us, our names are given the way I think people then further tick it out is they're picking and choosing, and we wanted only them to be picked after that. And so with them, I think Bunu is, I'm quite excited to see what Bunu does right now in the new show. I think it wasn't an easy experience, especially for them. But then we've also had this relationship for a long time. And yeah, I mean, it's a question for them, I think, not me, really.
When you say it's not an easy experience for them, so also like, why wasn't it easy?
Because there are constant questions, and it never ends. It just carries on. The whole thing of, rigor that one needs to kind of bring in. It was easy for me to then, I was on the easier side to be asking questions about the work. And but it's really an unfair, I mean, it's better to ask, I mean, it's a question for them, not for me.
Are there any other questions in the room?
There was this one thought I had when I saw the Suna Paranta version of the show, and you obviously also showed us images where there were, even though it was a large number of artists within the exhibition, but no names were part of the show. Of course, of course, from the credit document, etc., it was there. So that was your curatorial decision to have the whole experience as one immersion. But were the artists in line with that? Was it a collective decision? Just wondering how, because they're also all image makers, many of them. So what happens when the images get blurred between who has ownership to the which image?
I mean, it wasn't a collective decision, but we were asking them for permission in terms of, is it okay if we do this? But that's what I'm also saying, that I think I was very lucky to not be a curator, but being an artist to do this, because we didn't quite know where it would go. There were people, for example, at Ishara who were a little confused because they did go first looking for the name labels, but that's also what we didn't want, because then that also creates its own hierarchy in terms of I'm going here to see this artist's work. And we wanted people to kind of, in that search for that artist, be able to find. And of course, there were these booklets alongside it, so it wasn't as if the works could not be identified. But it's just that there is this penchant to kind of validation. I think in my own practice, I got through a master class that was well known. The same people who would not look at me or not talk to me suddenly started talking to me, and then, something else happened. I joined a gallery, and then some people are like, oh, you're not just a photographer, you're an artist. So I feel like, unfortunately, this idea of validation is just there, present all the time, and it was just this one opportunity that we had. I'm not sure if we'll be able to do it in any other way, do it in the same way again, but I think that we just kind of took the opportunity and ran with it to see. And for me, I think what the generous part of Ishara was that it gave us the space to do something that may have worked, may not have worked, but we did want to try it in terms of how do you have one work becoming someone else's, and vice versa, and pulling, I feel like if there were names, then you wouldn't be able to pull out these bunches. You'd be pulling out names, maybe one from here, one from somewhere else.
One last question. Sorry, then I saw a phantom hand. Okay, there is one. Yeah, sure.
I'm sorry, I haven't seen actually any of your work in person, but I have seen it online. And I usually think of maps as something that makes your life a bit easier, that you find your way through them maybe. But when I see a map, I'm kind of more lost in some ways. But I'm also excited by that because I have a feeling that you're also looking at doubt, glitches, like you said, but also I think the underbelly of living. Some of your photographs that I have seen expose quite personal stuff. And I'm curious to know, as somebody who is working with image making and ideas, where do you see doubt as something that helps people transcend things?
Yeah, I think doubt is important for me to be making work to begin with because it allows me to not stop and to dig further. A little bit of doubt is always good, and I think doubt in a lot of my, for the other person on the other side, it's the way it's a quick world where we take meaning, so that for me doubt is more like a bit of a speed bump of sorts to kind of make someone rethink. Because the way I think images are being circulated now, and so the work The Lost and the Bird, for example, the video work, which is actually really about tweaking the context, changing it, to giving people information at a pace that is very difficult to kind of process at that moment. Doubt for me in that work, for example, is just an invitation to look again. And because it's an image world today, everyone's talking, conversing in images, but at the same time, I feel that no matter how image heavy it is getting, and one would imagine that the reading of it would get more complex, I feel like it's getting more immediate, more superficial, more, everyone's looking for the first meaning that they can get. And because there is no time, we are moving to the next image after that. So you're picking as fast as you can. So doubt is really and in some ways the idea of the glitch is really to kind of look again. It's an invitation. And even regarding the map, the first walkthrough that I'd given was to the artist. The second walkthrough, which was for an institution, the only way I could describe the exhibition was really like a bowl of noodle soup, and it was the artworks were like the noodles, and the notations were like the broth, and the citation was like the condiments, and each thing coming together kind of makes a wholesome meal of sorts, and the entanglement of the noodles, you need the broth for it in some ways to slip one noodle out. And so the map was really the noodles, and the exhibition was the full meal.
On that note, thank you, Sohrab. We're going to have a tea break and then be back for a 10-minute tea break, and then we're going to have Jacinta Kerkatal, our speaker for today.